Check. Oh, hey, we're live. Hi. Thanks for coming out. My name's Laura Whitmore. I'm with Backstory Events, and we're here tonight with Parade Magazine to share John Oates and his wonderful new book, Change of Seasons, with you. Just to give you a little rundown of the evening, we're going to be chatting with John for a few minutes, and probably about 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll give you guys a chance to ask some questions, and then John's going to play for you. And then when we're done with that, we're going to take John upstairs, and you can, if you have a book already, you can bring it up and have him sign it, and if you don't, we'll be selling books upstairs too. So please come on up and say hello and meet John and get your book signed and all that. So without further ado, we're going to get started. I'd like to introduce you to Brad Tolinski, our interviewer for the evening. Brad is former editor of Guitar World magazine and author of the book Play It Loud, The History of the Electric Guitar. And thanks, Brad. And without further ado, we have the fantastic John Oates, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame guitar player, and half of course, Hall Oates. So thank you for joining us, John.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, John, thanks for being here.
Hey, Brad, here we are.
Here we are. So, love the book. Fantastic from beginning to end. You know, sometimes I read these bios and the last, like, somehow 30 pages, you know.
They suck.
They suck.
No.
But this one, all the way through, it's great. So, what motivated you? I know writing books tough work, so, you know, what motivated you to do this?
Well, I've always looked at myself as a writer. I thought maybe one day I would write a book. I didn't know it would be a memoir. I began a series of interviews with a guy named Chris Epting from California who is actually from Pennsylvania and seemed to get me in a way. And in the course of the interviews, I had mentioned I'd kept journals from 1970 until 1980. Yep. They were all handwritten 13 volumes. And he said, could I see them? I made copies. I sent him the copies. And that was really what kickstarted the project.
You have a really cool theme that holds the book together. It's called Change of Seasons. What sort of, how did that come to you to use that theme?
Well, I wanted to write a book not only, you know, about, you know, the music business and my experiences and my life, but I wanted to write a book about transformation. I feel like in a way that my experiences professionally and personally had a lot to do with trying to figure out strategies to move forward. And, you know, I had some setbacks. I had obviously a lot of positive things happen. But Change of Season was a song that I wrote in the late 80s when things were changing for me, not only personally and professionally. And it just seemed to sum up the theme of the book.
I want to go back to the beginning. And when did you first know you were a musician?
I think I was a musician from the time I was born, but I didn't know it, of course. I began to sing at a very early age. I have a recording of me singing Here Comes Peter Cottontail at 3 years old, I believe, 3 or 4 years old, at Coney Island in one of those phonograph booths where you would literally cut a record, as they say, cut a record. And so I was always singing. My mom was a bit of a stage mother, and she encouraged me and pushed me a bit. And so I always sang. I was always the center of attention in a way, and in my little family. And, you know, the little family escalated to a larger audience along the way.
So it's sort of interesting because everybody thinks that in the early 60s it was all about the Beatles and the Stones and the British invasion. But there was a lot of other music happening at that time, and you were almost sort of a skeptic of that. Like, what is the music that you first fell in love with and inspired you to become a musician?
Well, believe it or not, I'm actually old enough to remember music before rock and roll. So that's where I start. My parents were obviously from the, you know, after World War II, they were of the greatest generation, and big band music was their thing. And as a child, you know, being somewhat musically sensitive, I remember big band music. It was the music they played at home. It was the music we heard on the radio in the car. So as rock and roll began in the early 50s, now I was a little kid, but I started playing guitar at 6 years old. So I began to understand, wow, this is new. This is something happening here. And of course, being a young guitar player, I knew three or four chords, which pretty much got you through the early rock and roll stuff. Picked up on Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Elvis and all that stuff. So I feel like in a way my life has paralleled the development of rock and roll.
Right. In the book, you mentioned that you used to go and see a lot of live shows. I mean, you saw some of the absolute great R&B performers: Jackie Wilson, James Brown, The Temptations. I mean, do you remember any show in particular, and how did watching those guys influence you as a performer?
Well, to put it into some kind of context, Philadelphia was an incredibly fertile place in the 60s. You had this incredible R&B tradition. Philadelphia had a theater called the Uptown Theater, which was very similar to the Apollo here in New York. It was part of what was known as the Chitlin Circuit, with the Howard Theater in D.C., and it's where all the R&B performers performed. And every Saturday night, I would go to the Uptown, and I would see, as you said, all the greats. And I got to see Stevie Wonder do Fingertips when he was 12 years old. And, yes, it was, it was. And as and then, but at the same time, the Philadelphia Folk Festival is now celebrating its 53rd anniversary, I believe. So that was happening. I could see Doc Watson, Mississippi John Hurt, Joan Baez, Phil Oakes, a lot of traditional musicians who were being rediscovered and brought back, to the Northeast, to the cities, to be rediscovered by a younger generation. So here I was as a guitar player being able to absorb this incredible legacy of American R&B and at the same time folk music and traditional music. And really, in a way, it's all American folk music. And so that's how I viewed it. I viewed it as this incredible pastiche of American history, really, in a way.
It was during this period that you met Daryl Hall. Mm-hmm. And could you tell us a little bit about how you guys, in the very beginning sort of met and started working together?
Well, it's crazy what happened. Just a little, here again, I'm going to backpedal a little bit. I just came from Philadelphia today and had the rare opportunity to go back to the place where Daryl and I actually met for the first time. It was a place called the Adelphi Ballroom in West Philadelphia. It's now an African church. And I was lucky enough to go there and do an interview for CBS Sunday Morning and walk into the room where I first met Daryl Hall. Now, I hadn't been in that room in 50 years. It was crazy. I thought I was time tripping. And we met because Daryl had a group called the Temptones. It was a kind of a doo-wop street corner harmony group. I had a group called the Masters. We had both cut records. They were being played simultaneously on Philadelphia radio, WHAT and WDAS. And I was aware of him, but we didn't know each other. And there was a gang fight. We escaped down the service elevator.
I thought he was on one side of the...
No. We did not have a gang fight. There was a gang fight in the crowd among the teenage kids who were there for the record hop. And the service elevator no longer exists, but we went down to the street level and basically walked out on the sidewalk and went, "Hey, man, yeah, cool, I like your song, blah, blah, blah." And later on we met and eventually became friends and started working together. It's all in the book, folks.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to try to get some stuff out of you that isn't in the book, but
Go.
You say that in that partnership, one of the most important things was the sense of each one of your own individualism. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, everyone, obviously the world has taken to calling us Hall Oates, which is a convenient and much easier way to describe a band that sounds really much more like a law firm. Not the greatest name in the world. However, if you look at our albums, you'll see on every album it says Daryl Hall and John Oates, and we made it was a conscious effort to do that because we felt like we didn't want to be this duo, so to speak. We wanted to be two individuals who worked together and created something together. And I know that seems like we're kind of slicing it very thinly, but that's really what we're about. And to this day, that's what we're about. And I think in the modern era, in the last 15, 20 years, what Daryl and I have done individually kind of it really will kind of endorses the fact that we are two individuals with two different points of view and two different musical personalities. When we come together, we do something that's really special and really incredible. But when we're apart, we also do something that we like to think is pretty good.
Your first couple albums you did with the legendary producer Arif Mardin. You guys were sort of young guys in the studio. How did he help? How did he work with you on those first couple records?
Well, just the very fact that we got signed to Atlantic Records here in New York was a major. It was very important to us because having grown up in that great R&B tradition, I don't think it gets any more pure and more important than being on Atlantic Records, the home of Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin and on and on. So to be signed to that label and then to be shepherded and really brought along by the great Arif Mardin, who is without a doubt one of the greatest record producers of all time. He was a mentor, he was kind of a father figure to us. The beauty of working with Arif was that he was so fluid and knowledgeable in all aspects of American music. He was a Turk, but in love with America in terms of its musical heritage. And he could draw on jazz and big band and folk and you name it. And he let us be who we were, but he helped us become who we could be. I know that's a little convoluted sounding, but really, he was really an amazing person to be around. And the way he produced records, the way he ran his recording sessions, to this day, to me, it's a template for how I record today, even in Nashville with the players I'm working with.
This is something that wasn't in the book, but I've always been a little curious about. So you worked with Arif, and Arif did many amazing R&B records, but one of the things he's most famous for was, producing the Bee Gees for Saturday Night Fever. And it just seems to me you guys could have been a disco act if you had changed things a little bit differently. I mean, you had the R&B roots, you had the producer. Did you have... Did anybody try to push you in that direction, or did you consider disco, which was, hugely commercial and popular at that time, as something that appealed to you?
No, Brad.
Well, there were some good disco records. Come on.
I'm sorry. No. No, I think we were trying to find ourselves. We did 2 albums with Arif. Neither album was really commercially successful, but they were artistically successful. And we moved on to Todd Rundgren, did War Babies, which was a very experimental rock album. But I think we needed to kind of try things in order to find out who we could be. And eventually, our sound coalesced into something original to us.
Well, speaking of Abandoned Luncheonette, She's Gone is one of the great classic songs of the last 3 or 4 decades. I mean, I still get chills every time I listen to that song. Could you tell us a little bit how you put that together?
Well, it's all in the book, Brad. But for all those of you who either can't read or don't want to read, I was carousing around the village at 2 o'clock in the morning. Don't ask me why, because that's the kind of thing that I enjoy doing. And went to eat at a place called the Pink Teacup on Bleecker Street. It was a soul food restaurant that, believe it or not, in New York City in the early 70s, there weren't a lot of places where you could actually get food in the middle of the night. I know that's hard to believe in New York, but so I was sitting in there dressed in some crazy outfit of some sort, and in the door came a gal with a pink tutu and cowboy boots. And, well, we basically started dating that night. And that's a euphemism for things that happened quickly in the 70s. Okay, just making sure you're with me. Yeah. And I asked her if she would go out on New Year's Eve. It was the winter of 1972, December. And she said yes, and on New Year's Eve, she never showed up. It was the greatest thing that ever happened to me because I sat on the couch with an acoustic guitar and I went, and she's gone, And I figured if she isn't coming tonight, she's never coming. And the following day, I was still sitting on the couch singing the same thing, and Daryl came in and he said, what's that? And I said, well, it's a little thing, blah, blah, blah. He said, yeah, it's cool. And he sat down at the piano, he came up with the groove for the verse, and we literally wrote the song in about 2 hours.
I think the kids these days call it being ghosted. So it could have been she ghosted me,
She
which
ghosted
wouldn't be nearly
It was
classic.
really, really a good thing.
Yeah. Something that's not in the book that I was curious about is, on your first several records, you guys use primarily session musicians to back you up. And, amazing players, Hugh McCracken, all those guys. But it was a little bit unusual because, rock bands would go into the studio and they'd bring in their band and that whole thing. I was sort of curious as to why you guys use session people.
Well, I equated a lot to the old Hollywood star system back in the, in the 30s and stuff like that. It was almost an accepted formula. You took an artist who was young, you put them with a producer who could kind of, oversee the project, report to the label, surround them with good players to make the record they needed to make. And at the time, honestly, I think we never felt comfortable with our band. We didn't think our road band was quite up to par. I mean, the thing about playing live and the thing about making a record is that playing live is immediate, it's of the moment, and it's gone. Making a record is forever, and you want to make sure you have the right players and the right people to support that moment. So we were very satisfied with that. We learned a lot. We got to play with some of the greatest musicians on the planet. But as the time went on, our touring band developed into a much tighter unit, and we felt that it was more true to our sound. And by the 80s, we were actually recording with our touring band, and, well, the results, I guess, speak for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly not faulting you. I mean, playing music with the caliber of people that are on those, I mean, that's an education in
We had
itself.
incredible musicians. We've been very blessed and lucky over the years.
So around the times you brought up War Babies and the Hall Oates, Daryl Hall, John Oates album. Those were influenced. You guys came back to New York City and you guys were hanging out. It was like punk rock, new wave sort of world here in New York. I was just wondering how those things affected those records, because you did take a little more rock and left turn on this.
I think you can hear the New York's new wave and punk influence on the later albums that we made in the late 70s, like Along the Red Ledge, Ecstatic, and then even on Voices. I think our sound got leaner. It got more I wouldn't say simplistic, but simpler in terms of its direction and harder. And it was just, really, it wasn't that we were trying to copy what was happening, but being in New York City and walking the streets and going out and seeing Patti Smith and the New York Dolls and Television and all those really amazing bands that were carving this new wave, you just pick up on things. You pick up on a vibe. And somehow, rather than kind of try to copy it, you translate it into something that you do. And that's really what it was.
Well, during this time, you guys end up with huge hits. Sarah Smiles, She's Gone. Very weird roundabout story with that we won't get into. It's in the book. But I wondered how having those... Can you point to one thing that you look at that how your life changed after having that initial success?
Well, it changed in a lot of ways. I think what happened was when we had, as you said, Sarah Smiles, She's Gone, and Rich Girl all in a row in the mid-'70s, it really took us from being this folky kind of club act to being on stage and playing arenas. And I think what we realized was in order to play arenas and larger venues, we had to change the way we performed. We had to kind of up the energy level. And I think that was important because that enabled us to realize that, okay, if we're going to communicate on this level, we need to adjust. Really, the 70s were an entire decade of learning, adjustment, and crafting a sound for ourselves. Really, that's what it was.
Right. And when you're playing bigger places, you have to learn how to make it heard in the cheap seats, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Bigger amps help. Yeah.
But what was really, because I'm a total music nerd. What really impressed me is you guys were having all this success, and obviously having fun. But all of a sudden you decided to go back and take music theory lessons. What motivated that?
Well, I was basically a kind of a ear musician. I learned and played by ear. I was a folky, I kind of, my musicianship was based around having a good ear, basically. Mm-hmm. When we started making the War Babies album with Todd Rundgren, we had a bunch of jazz players playing with us, and we started playing much more experimental, sophisticated time changes, things that were outside of my, kind of comfort zone as a musician. I heard about a woman who lived on 57th Street named Helen Hobbs Jordan. And she wrote the curriculum at Juilliard. She was an older woman, and she taught private professional music theory lessons. And so I enrolled in her class, and she was a character. She told me, if you want to get B's, go to college. If you want so the book. Anyway. And so I did. I did this intensive harmony and theory a series of lessons, which really changed the way made music made sense for the first time, as opposed to just winging it. I was actually understanding, the mechanics and the nuts and bolts and the mathematics behind what I was doing, and that really has held me in good stead over the years. And now, over the years, even though I don't use it all the time, but when I have to, I can communicate on a level that's with on a much more sophisticated musical level.
You guys released the Voices record, which was a huge record. Had Kiss on My List, You Make My Dreams Come True, that cover of You Lost That Lovin' Feeling, which was fantastic. But what was really interesting about it is you guys took the reins. You became the producers of your own record, and the result shows. Yes. So, what was the difference in your mind? Was there any difference?
Well, the entire decade of the 70s, that learning experience, working with Arif Mardin, working with Todd Rundgren, working with David Foster. By the way, David Foster, who is obviously a very now famous, legendary record producer, the first album he ever produced was our album, Along the Red Ledge. A lot of people don't realize that. And we learned from every one of those experiences, and we learned from having these incredible session musicians. We finally developed a band, and we finally said, you know what, we've got this. We're just going to do it. And the record company, to their credit, just said, okay, you guys go and make the record you want to make. And we did, and I guess the results speak for themselves.
Yeah. Well, you guys also came up in a really wonderful era, and I think it's different than these days, where record companies actually had a little patience with artists. They would develop, let you become artists. Do you feel that that's lacking today?
Yes. But the world is different. The environment is different. The economic environment of the music business is completely different. So you really can't compare those two eras. Yes, we came up during a time when musicians made the music and record companies' job was to figure out how to sell it. I thank God that I had that unique and opportunity to really develop during that time. You have to remember, Daryl and I made 4 albums before we had a hit. In this day and age, you don't get to make 4 albums. Most record companies won't stick with you that long, except for Warner Brothers in Nashville with John Esposito, who will actually stick with people because he loves music. If he's here, I hope he doesn't mind me kissing his ass a little.
So along your journey, you met a lot of interesting people. And I know that in the beginning you were a little skeptical about the Beatles.
I wasn't skeptical about the Beatles.
You were. It's in the book.
No,
I swear to God.
I could care less. I wasn't skeptical.
Oh, he didn't care. Okay.
No. You have to understand. You have to understand. No, you have to put it in context. All right. Let's think about this way. Philadelphia had American Bandstand. American Bandstand was all about teenagers and dancing. If you couldn't dance in Philadelphia, you were a nobody. Well, when the Beatles and the Stones came out, and the English Invasion in general, at first, that was not danceable music. For the Stones, it was kind of a rehash and a reintroduction of American roots blues. The Beatles, even they were doing Little Richard and some of that stuff. It wasn't really danceable, and the Philadelphia radio kind of ignored them and said, you can't dance to this stuff. It was crap. What is this? Mm-hmm. And obviously, the music spoke for itself, and as the English Invasion evolved and developed, they made some of the greatest music ever. But in the beginning, I was doing horn arrangements when the Beatles were doing, She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah. To me, it sounded like a garage band. I was a little bit jaded, but I came around to realizing, what they were really doing and eventually how amazing their music was.
This all leads up to the fact that you actually became decent friends with George Harrison.
Yeah.
Can you, we're all fascinated by the Beatles, and you tell everybody a little bit about George and maybe one encounter.
My good friend Paul McCartney said it's not cool to drop names, but oh God, that was so cheap. I met George Harrison through, I'll drop another name, through Jackie Stewart, the great race driver.
Jackie Stewart?
Jackie. Jackie, yes. And I was a big race fan. I loved to race cars, and I still like all that stuff. George was a big race fan, and we were introduced in England, and we became friends, and we bonded over racing, not so much music. I actually was intimidated by George. I didn't want to feel like the guy who, hey, George, now that we're friends, let's play a song together. Let's write a song, whatever. So I actually avoided talking to him about music, and maybe he appreciated it. I think he did. We went to races together in Europe and both here in America. We hung out. He invited Daryl and I over to his house in L.A. to watch the Ruddles. I don't know if you know the Ruddles, but he was so proud of that because he produced that. And through the whole thing, he kept interrupting the movie and saying, "You see that? That's just like me and John and me and Paul when we..." And we're like, I'm going, is this really happening? It's like, George Harrison is, and we're watching a parody of the Beatles with George Harrison. Anyway, and so we finally, I asked George if he would record with us in L.A. when he was living out there, and we were doing the Red Ledge album, Along the Red Ledge, and said, "Hey, George, would you want to come play on our album?" And he said, "Only if I can just be in the band. I don't want to do anything special. I just want to be in the band." And we're like, okay, whatever you want. And he came and he played acoustic guitar all afternoon, and it was amazing. And he just sat there and had a big smile on his face and played with this incredible band that we had, and it was really cool. He was a great, great person.
You guys had incredible, almost overwhelming success in the 80s. And it comes through in the book, to some degree, you felt a little ambivalent about it. You say that you felt almost like two different people, like somebody that's in it and somebody sort of watching it. What were the sort of good and bad sides of the go-go 80s?
Well, the good was that there was a lot of money. The bad was that there was a lot of money. Really, the 80s for me felt like life in fast forward. There was no time to reflect. There was no time to... I think people have maybe they don't, but I think a lot of people might have a misconception that success brings this euphoric level of happiness. Now, perhaps for some people it might. The success we had in the 80s, all it meant for me was that time disappeared. And I really look back, and especially having written the book and having to dredge up all these memories, I look back at the 70s as a much more interesting, fun, and rewarding time because it was an act of becoming, and to me the act of becoming is much more interesting than taking the victory lap, so to speak. So the 80s went by in a blur. There was no time for anything. Sure, we had #1 record and we sold millions of records, et cetera, but honestly, it wasn't fun. And when it was over and we kind of voluntarily ended it, it was really, it was almost like taking a deep breath and going, can we just get back to music again and why we started this thing?
What happened?
Yeah, exactly.
One of the songs that came out of that era, that in the book you say sort of summed it up a bit for you was the song "Man-Eater." Can you tell us a little bit about how that song was written?
Well, we used to hang out at a really cool place on Ninth Street between 5th and 6th called Mary Lou's. It was an Italian restaurant, kind of a hangout for the various cool 80s folks like models and actors and musicians, and it was like the place to be for us. It was kind of a private club almost. And one night I was sitting there with a group of friends, and this gal came into the room, and she literally took over the room with her. Well, she was absolutely gorgeous. And she sat down across from me at the table, and she started talking and had the absolute foulest mouth on any human being I've ever heard in my life. So I'm looking at this incredibly gorgeous woman who's on the cover of Vogue, and I'm going, this is what? And I said, she will chew you up. She will spit you out. I was like, okay. So my songwriter antenna kind of went up, and then something else went up a little bit. And then I what are you, children?
He meant one of his eyebrows.
This is how songwriting works, folks. You need to have someone kick you in the butt and inspire you. Anyway, I went back and I came up with the idea she's a man-eater and started playing it as a reggae song, toyed around with it for quite a while, could never come up with a verse, and got with Daryl. He dug what was happening, and he said, no, man, reggae, how about this? And he came up with this really cool kind of Motown-esque groove. And as we began to write the song, we started writing it with the idea about writing about a woman. And then we realized, this is not a cool idea. It's not a cool idea to call a woman a man-eater. And then we started thinking about New York. We were right in the middle of the 80s. It was fast forward, Wolf of Wall Street, greed is good, more is better. And we just basically took that and we said, you know what? The man-eater is New York City. Let's write this about New York City, but let's make it feel like it's about a woman because it'll somehow communicate better. And that's what we did.
Well, talking about exclusive clubs, you and Daryl were part of the We Are the World sessions. Yeah. It was produced by Michael Jackson, Quincy Jones, and had
Lionel Richie,
and every big star in the known universe at that time. What was that like to walk in that room, or did you feel like by that time you had earned it?
It was really weird to walk in that room. First of all, they were really smart because it was during the American Music Awards, and at that time there weren't, 100 different award shows. So when the American Music Awards happened, everyone who was in pop music, who was anyone, was in LA for the American Music Awards. So they knew they had a captive audience. So they invited everyone to the recording studio, and the whole they made it very clear that no handlers, no managers, no assistants were allowed past this door. So once you walked into the actual recording floor, it was just the artist. And it's very rare in the world of pop music and professional music when artists are like stripped of all their kind of support system. And all of a sudden it felt like high school in the weirdest way. There was like the smart kids and the nerds and the funny ones, and it was like really weird. And everyone let their guard down. I was standing on a platform, and I had Bob Dylan right here, and I had Ray Charles right here. And I was like, okay, I'm good. I am so good. And it was a really weird dynamic of what happened that night. I can't really share a lot of the stuff, but it was a great night, and it was just a really unique opportunity to be in a room with some of the most amazing talent in America, and just watching them kind of feel their way through without any help from their kind of handlers.
It's a really great part of the book, and to get the rest of the story, like I said, the rest of the book is very entertaining, but it's it must have been quite a night. So I've got a couple more questions for you, John, and then you're going to play some music for us, which is awesome. One thing that you don't talk about in the book that I was really curious about is your guitar playing. Oh. Not really. You sort of touch on it. Oh. Yeah, and I thought, what has the guitar meant to you as a...
no one has ever said that to me. You're right.
Yeah.
I actually never talked about guitar playing in the book.
Not really.
Wow.
I just blew his mind.
You did just blow my mind, honestly. That's a surprise. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've had a guitar in my hand since I've been 6 years old. Maybe it's just so much a part of me that I just took it for granted, but I shouldn't, because it's really been it's been the way of speaking. I just, I love playing the guitar. I've always loved playing the guitar. And, since my move to Nashville in the early 2000s, I have actually rededicated myself to playing the guitar, because when I moved there, I realized how high the bar was set in terms of musicianship. And
A lot of good players out
a
there.
lot of good players. And, in a way, I don't say I was coasting, but it was much easier for me to play songs that I was very familiar with Daryl over the years, and not have to really think too much. And all of a sudden, I was thrown into an arena where people were their level of musicianship was very high. And so I stepped it up in a lot of ways.
Well, one of my favorite parts of the book is you recall in the earlier days of going to the folk clubs and hanging out with the great Doc Watson. Now, that name might not be familiar to a lot of people out there, but Doc is one of the greatest guitarists in the history of anything.
Right.
And John, you played with him, so you must have been pretty good if you could hang with Doc.
I think he was charitable. I had a great guitar teacher named Jerry Ricks, who became a friend and a mentor, and he a lot of the bluesmen and a lot of the folk players, when they would come to Philadelphia and they couldn't afford a hotel, they would sleep on Jerry's couch, and of course I would be there, and I got to meet them and see them firsthand. So it was a really unique experience. Doc Watson was, without a doubt, and he redefined the guitar in a lot of ways. Yeah. He was a big inspiration to me and a hero of mine.
Well, you're in for a real treat, because you're gonna hear just how great of a guitar player John is when he plays some songs for us.
Should we do a Q&A, a little question?
Oh,
Do we have questions?
yes.
Does anybody have questions?
Thank you. You mentioned that We Are the World, and about 2 decades later, you made an appearance on a very little-known TV show called Wonder Chosen, singing a darkly satirical parody of that sort of charity single. And it's such an odd show that very few people know about. And I just wondered how that came about, what it was like, and if you knew anything about the tone and content of that particular show before going into it.
No. I had no idea what it was. They called me up and said, "Would you like to do this?" And I thought, okay, this is really weird. You know what? Let me just, who knows? It might be fun. And honestly, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I just walked in there, they gave me this song, I sang it, and I went, oh, this is really weird. But it was kind of the beginning of the kind of, I don't know, the new kind of virtual world of, throwing stuff out there on the internet. And I was interested. I was intrigued by it. So, yes, I did it, and I had no idea why I did it. And to this day, I still don't know why I did it. Anybody else?
When I get home, I'll have questions.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm a huge fan of your whole body of work, and one of the things that I'm really appreciate is just how you remain true to yourself and as songwriters, but still are able to bring in kind of trend-wise what's happening musically at the time. And I'm just curious, what's happening now musically? Are there things that are trend-wise that you guys are taking up or picking up on, or are you fans of what's happening in the, I guess it's a pretty broad question, but in general, rock music or pop music now, are you taking things from that right now?
Absolutely. My ear's to the ground all the time. I love, I think there's a lot of great pop music being made. I'm not a fan, to be honest with you, of music made by committee, which a lot of pop music is made. If you look at a lot of pop music, you'll see there's 5, 6 writers on a song. But it's a different world, and it's a different approach. And I think what's interesting to me is that when Daryl and I were making the pop music that we made in the 80s, we were still approaching it like traditional singer-songwriters who would write a song and then we would produce it in the studio. I think the difference with what's going on today is that the pop performers of today have embraced and integrated the production itself into the actual compositional part of their life. So there's really no difference between the composition and the production. They become one and the same. And that's kind of cool in a way, because it's really using the tools that they have at their disposal. I love a lot of people. I'm a huge fan of Jim James and My Morning Jacket. I love I love Bruno Mars. I think he's making state-of-the-art pop songs, and the list goes on and on. I mean, I'm a fan. I can listen through the production to the song, and here again, I'll always go to the source if I can.
Before this, John, you were telling me about a new record that you're working on that sounded really, really interesting.
I started out, I wanted to start recording, and in a way, the book kind of brought me back to the beginnings, because having done the book and the memories that it brought up, it brought me back to the earliest days of the music that it was inspiring to me as a child. And when I mean a child, from the time I was 6 until I was about 18 or 17. And a lot of that had to do with traditional roots American music. And I started going back to it, and I started thinking about it, and I said, where does this music come from? And I'm talking about pre-rock and roll, proto-rock and roll. The music that was done in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, when the phonograph was invented, when the vinyl record was invented. Because really the vinyl record and the phonograph were instrumental in making American popular music accessible to people in their homes. And I thought, wow, this is I never really thought about that. And so I began to look at those songs, and I started to play them, and I started to learn them. And as I started to learn them, I got intrigued with them. And so I began to put together a band to kind of recreate some of the earliest music that kind of paved the way for American rock and roll and popular music. And it's been a real eye-opener for me, because some of this music is really unique and cool.
Shall we hear some music?
Yeah, let's.
One girl.
Maybe one more question.
I'm a huge fan for many, many years. I just wanted to know how you feel about the upcoming tour.
Well, Daryl and I are going out with Tears for Fears. Yeah, it's going to be fun. And that starts May 4th in Tulsa. And we end up here at Forest Hills in Newark. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I love Tears for Fears. I knew those guys in the 80s. I think they're a great band. They've written great songs. To me, it's a fun package. We haven't done it yet, but something tells me it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it. So, all right.
All right.
Cheers.
Is that it? Am I done?
Not yet. Not yet.
Not
you have
quite.
to play some.
I'll
have
play
to play
a little
some
bit.
music.
Sure, let's do it.
Thanks, John.
Let's try this. Thank you, Brad. That was great. That was really good. Well, speaking of that early music, I'll try to play you something that, in a way, I'll play you a song that I recently had discovered that was some people considered to be one of the first real American pop songs that was recorded on a record that people could take home and play. This song was so popular that the guy who wrote it and played it, people couldn't believe that they could actually hear it at home, and then they could see him play it live. Now it seems like a very kind of normal idea, but I guess back in those days that was very unique. So it's a song by Emmett Miller, and he was a very influential to a lot of the music that came later. In his band were people like Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey and Gene Krupa, who went on to become very big in the big band era. So this is this little song that he used to do. That when he played it, he would get 3 or 4 encores when he played this song. I'll probably not get any, but that's okay. Anytime you're feeling lonely, anytime you're feeling blue, anytime you feel downhearted, that will prove my love for you is true. Anytime you're thinking about me, that's the time I'll be thinking of you. So anytime you say you want me back again, that's the time I'll come back home to you. Anytime you're thinking about me, oh, that's the time I'll be thinking of you. So anytime you say you want me back again, that's the time I'll come back home to you. So anytime you say you want me back again, that's the time I'll come back home to you. There you have it, folks. Here again, I've been, this book project has gotten me thinking about all the songs I learned as a little kid. My mom taught me a song when I was 4 or 5 years old in the kitchen, a song that she would always sing. She was a terrible singer, but she was a great stage mom. I started thinking about the song. I have a very good friend who got married, and I thought he wanted me to sing at his wedding, and I couldn't figure out a wedding song. So then I thought of this, and I went, wait a minute, that's a wedding song. And it was recorded by Al Jolson, I think, in 1929 or 30. And then it was recorded later, made famous by Judy Garland around the 1940s. So anyway, I played it at his wedding, and I'm going to give it a try. I haven't played it since. I really sucked at his wedding, so I'm going to try to make up for it now. Why do the bells keep ringing? Why do the birds keep singing? I want to give you a big surprise. I want to tell you why the bells are ringing. For me and my gal, the birds are singing. For me and my gal, everybody's been knowing to a wedding they're going, and for weeks they've been sewing every Susie and Sal. They're congregating for me and my gal. The car parson's waiting for me and my gal. And someday I'm gonna build a little home for 2 or 3 or 4 or more in love land for me and my gal. Everybody's been knowing to a wedding they're going, and for weeks they've been sewing every Susie and Sal. Oh, they're congregating for me and my gal. The parson's waiting for me and my gal. And someday I'm gonna build a little home for 2 or 3 or 4 or more in love land for me and my gal. The bells are ringing for me and my gal. When I said I was going to play some old songs, you had no idea. All right, well, I'm going to play the Delta Blues, and a lot of the stuff that I learned in the 60s was really very important to me and part of this new thing that I've been doing. And I kind of reimagined a Mississippi John Hurt song, which Mississippi John Hurt was a huge influence on me. And so let me play a little blues for you. Okay. Lay me down, pallet on your floor. Oh, won't you lay me down, pallet on your floor? Lay me down, pallet, down soft and low. Oh, won't you make me down a pallet on your floor? On up the country where it's cold and freezing snow, Colorado Bay. I said, gone up the country where it's cold and freezing snow. Gone to Colorado where it's cold and freezing snow. Ain't no telling how much further I may go. Make it soft and low. Make me a pallet on your floor. I wanna make it soft and low. Make me a pallet on your floor. Don't you let my good girl find me here. No. Say no. Oh, I said, please don't let my good girl find you here. Oh, she might cut you, beat and starve you too. Oh, ain't no telling what that little girl can do. Oh, ain't no telling what that little girl can do. I make it soft and low. Make me a pallet on your floor. Wanna make it soft and low. Make me a pallet. Make me a pallet on your floor. Yeah. All right. How we doing? Cool. All right. One more? 5 more? How about a little Doc Watson for you? Let it rain, let it pour, let it rain. Whole lot more, 'cause I got them deep road blues. Let the rain drop right on, let the wave sweep along, 'cause I got them deep river blues. My old gal, she's a good old pal. She looks like waterfowl when I get them deep river blues. Ain't no one gonna cry for me, and the fish all go out on the spree when I get them deep river blues. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
We good? Yes. Okay. So I could go on all night. You know that, right? Thank you guys very much for coming. I hope you enjoy the book.
Make sure that you check out Change of Seasons. John's great book. It's really a great read. Thank you, John, once again.
That was really good. Sure, thank you. All right. Thanks.
So in a minute, we'll get everybody to sort of line up to go up if you're going to get your book signed, and see how that goes.
All right, thanks, everybody.